every night at midnight, I heard my mother-in-law secretly entering my 7-year-old daughter's bedroom. Strangely, a few minutes later, she would come out with a pale face, trembling in fear. The next day, without telling anyone, I installed a CCTV camera in my daughter's room, and when I watched the recording, my heart nearly stopped beating. I saw something I never could have imagined. Turns out, before we get into the story, don't forget to say hi in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And make sure to hit the subscribe button on the Stories with Meaning network so you won't miss our next intriguing story. My name is Sarah. To outsiders, my life probably looks perfect. I have a hardworking husband, Edward, and a beautiful 7-year-old daughter named Lily. We live in my late father-in-law's house, a large, comfortable home on the outskirts of Willow Creek, Oregon. But the three of us aren't the only ones living there. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Margaret Collins, lives with us as well. After her husband passed away 2 years ago, Edward asked her to move in so she wouldn't be alone. I accepted it with an open heart. After all, she is Lily's grandmother, and as a woman who always wears a shawl, I've been taught to respect elders. At first, everything was fine. Mrs. Collins adored Lily. Sometimes I felt a little too much. Every afternoon when Lily came home from school, her grandmother would greet her with a tight hug, carry her backpack, and immediately spoon-feed her lunch, as if Lily were fragile porcelain that might shatter if left unattended. Edward only smiled at their closeness. "Isn't it great, Sarah? Lily's close to her grandma. Mom isn't lonely anymore," he said one afternoon. I nodded, though deep down there was a strange uneasiness I couldn't explain. That feeling worsened about 3 weeks ago. It started with small things. Mrs. Collins became quieter during dinner, yet her eyes were often fixed on Lily, her gaze hard to interpret. It wasn't affectionate, it felt expectant. Then I began having trouble sleeping. I kept waking up in the dead silence of the night. That night was the breaking point. I woke up with my throat painfully dry. The digital clock on my nightstand read 12:04 a.m. Edward was sleeping beside me, softly snoring. The house was utterly silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner and the ticking wall clock down the hall. I was about to get out of bed to grab some water when a sound froze me in place. Creak! It was faint, almost inaudible, but I recognized it instantly. It was Lily's bedroom door. My daughter has a habit of sleeping with her door slightly open, and the hinges desperately need oil. My heart began pounding. Had Lily woken up? Was she going to the bathroom? A nightmare? I held my breath and listened. No small footsteps, no crying, just silence. Then, a few seconds later, I heard footsteps. Slow, careful, tiptoeing. Not Lily's. These were adult footsteps. A cold fear crept up my spine. Who was in my daughter's room at this hour? A burglar? Carefully, I slipped from under the blanket, grabbed the instant shawl hanging beside the bed, and draped it over me. I didn't want to wake Edward. I was afraid of causing panic. Barefoot, I stepped onto the cold tile floor and quietly approached the bedroom door. I opened it just enough to peek through. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by pale moonlight streaming through the large window at the end. Lily's room was directly across from ours, slightly to the left. Her door was now completely closed. Whoever had entered was still inside with my daughter. I stood frozen, torn between screaming to wake Edward or confronting Lily's room alone. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. 5 minutes passed. It felt like an hour. Then I heard it again. Creak! Lily's door opened. A figure stepped out. I held my breath. The figure stood with their back to me, gently closing Lily's door without making a sound. Then they turned around. It was my mother-in-law. I was stunned. Why would my mother-in-law sneak into Lily's room in the middle of the night? Why was she moving like a thief? Why didn't she turn on the hallway light? She began walking slowly towards her own room, which was right next to Lily's. That's when she passed through the moonlight by the window. I gasped. Her face was ghostly pale. Cold sweat glistened on her forehead and temples. Her eyes were wide open with terror, staring straight ahead as if she had just seen a ghost. Her hands were shaking violently. This wasn't the expression of a grandmother who had just tucked in her granddaughter. This was pure, overwhelming fear. As she came closer, I squinted. She was clutching something tightly in her right hand, something small, a piece of paper. It looked stiff, like drawing paper from Lily's art supplies. Mrs. Collins hurried into her room and shut the door behind her. The hallway fell silent again. I remained behind my bedroom door, frozen. What had I just witnessed? Why did she look so terrified? And what did she take from Lily's room? That night, I didn't sleep again. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Edward as he slept peacefully, while thousands of questions raced through my mind. I knew something was terribly wrong in this house, something involving my daughter and my mother-in-law, and I had to find out what it was. The next morning felt normal, too normal. Sunlight streamed into the dining room, washing away the horror of the previous night. I prepared breakfast with mixed emotions. Lily sat at the table, quietly coloring in her sketchbook. Edward scrolled through his phone, sipping coffee. And Mrs. Collins? She was arranging plates, humming softly as if nothing in the world troubled her. I stared at her. There was no trace of fear or paleness left on her face. She looked like any loving grandmother. Had I imagined everything? No, I was absolutely certain of what I saw. Her trembling hands and terrified expression were far too real. I waited until Edward left for work and Lily was ready to be dropped off at school. This was my chance. After Edward's car disappeared around the corner, I returned to the kitchen where Mrs. Collins was washing dishes. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully so I didn't sound accusatory. "Mrs. Collins," I said softly. She turned and smiled. "Yes, Sarah? Last night, I woke up. I saw you coming out of Lily's room." Her smile froze, just for a second, very brief, but I saw the flash of panic in her eyes. She quickly regained control and let out a small laugh, a forced one. "Oh my goodness, Sarah, you must have been startled. I'm sorry if I scared you. I couldn't sleep. I was worried Lily might be cold, so I went in to check on her. Her blanket had slipped down to her feet. I didn't want her catching a cold." It was a classic excuse, perfectly reasonable, but it didn't explain the terror on her face. "She looked very pale last night," I said again, testing her. Mrs. Collins laughed once more, this time louder. "Pale? Oh, Sarah, you're imagining things," she said lightly. "That was probably just the moonlight. I'm an old woman, you know. When I wake up in the middle of the night, of course my face looks tired. And besides, I'm afraid of the dark. Walking alone down the hallway at midnight gave me a bit of a scare," she added, pressing her hand to her chest dramatically. I wasn't satisfied. "And the paper you were holding?" I asked. Mrs. Collins' hands, which had been folding a dish towel, froze mid-motion. "Paper?" she echoed, feigning confusion. "Yes," I said carefully. "I saw you holding a piece of paper. It looked like drawing paper." "Oh, that," she said, as if suddenly remembering. No, that wasn't drawing paper. It was a recipe, my steamed cake recipe I found in a magazine yesterday. I slipped it into my house dress pocket. Maybe when I bent over to tuck Lily in, it fell out, so I picked it up again." She chuckled. "You really notice everything, Sarah, even a little recipe paper." Her explanation was long, detailed, too neat. I fell silent. I knew she was lying. The paper I had seen was stiff, not flimsy like a torn magazine page, and I was certain it had come from Lily's sketchbook, but I had no proof. Pressing her further would only start a fight, so I decided to retreat, for now. "Oh, I see, Mrs. Collins. I'm sorry if I sounded suspicious. I was just worried," I said, forcing a thin smile. "It's all right, Sarah. That just means you're a good mother. Now go, take Lily to school or she'll be late." she returned to the dishes. The entire drive to school, my thoughts were restless. Mrs. Collins' alibi was too perfect. That afternoon, I tried calling Edward to tell him about my suspicions. "Sarah," Edward replied on the other end, sounding exhausted. "What's wrong with you? Mom already told you. She was just checking Lily's blanket. That's normal for a grandmother. And about the recipe paper? Yeah, that makes sense. Why are you suddenly so suspicious of my mother?" "But she looked terrified," I insisted, "not just pale." "She's afraid of the dark," he said dismissively. "Don't blow this out of proportion. Mom loves Lily. She would never do anything strange. You probably just misinterpreted what you saw. I'm busy right now." The call ended. I exhaled in frustration. Edward, as always, defended his mother. I was alone in this. That afternoon, when Lily picked up from school, I tried asking her directly. I crouched down in front of her and adjusted her little shawl. "Sweetheart," I asked as gently as possible, "did Grandma come into your room last night?" Lily tilted her head, thinking. "No, Mommy," she said. "I slept really well." Her answer only confused me more. How could she not know? Then Lily's eyes suddenly lit up. "Oh, but I did have a dream," she exclaimed excitedly. "I dreamed about Grandpa." I froze. Grandpa Thomas, Edward's late father. "What did Grandpa do in your dream?" I asked carefully. "He asked me to draw," Lily said innocently. "He showed me a picture of our house. Then Grandpa said, 'Lily, color right here,'" she continued, pointing to an imaginary spot on the wall. "Isn't that silly, Mommy? He told me to color the wall." My heart skipped. A dream about Grandpa, drawing, the missing sketchbook pages. Was it all connected? That night, I pretended to go to sleep early. I lay stiff in bed, forcing my eyes shut while my ears stayed alert. The ticking clock felt like it was hammering inside my skull. 1 hour passed. 2 hours. Edward was already snoring. Exactly at 12:05 a.m., I heard it again. Creak! Lily's bedroom door. I heard Mrs. Collins' careful footsteps crossing the hallway. Silence. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Then, creak! The door closed. The same hurried footsteps returned to her room. The third night, it happened again. Midnight, she entered. Minutes later, she left. I couldn't take it anymore. This wasn't about checking a blanket. This was a ritual, an obsession. The next day, while Mrs. Collins was away at her weekly prayer meeting at the local community center and Lily was still at school, I made a decision. I had to know what she was doing in that room and why Lily never remembered it. Silence. I started searching. I remembered Lily often complained that her sketchbooks ran out quickly. I checked her desk. 3 brand new sketchbooks were still sealed, but the one she had been using was missing. I searched under her bed, in her school bag. Nothing. Panic began creeping in. I ran to the kitchen and opened the trash bin under the sink. Nothing. Then I remembered something. Sometimes Mrs. Collins threw organic waste into the compost bin in the backyard. I rushed outside. Next to the compost bin was a large black garbage bag, ready for pickup. My hands trembled as I opened it. The sour smell of leftover food hit my nose. Fighting nausea, I dug through it. And there it was. Lily's sketchbook. I pulled it out. The cover was dirty and wet. My hands shook as I opened it. Several pages in the middle were missing, not neatly torn, ripped forcefully out, leaving rough edges near the spiral binding. My mother-in-law hadn't just entered Lily's room. She hadn't taken just one sheet. She had stolen my daughter's drawings. Drawings Lily may have made based on her dreams of Grandpa Thomas. My breath came out ragged.
Anger and fear collided inside me. I needed proof. I needed to see with my own eyes what Mrs. Collins was doing in that room and why Lily never remembered it. Tonight. Anger is powerful fuel. It crushed my fear and gave me courage I'd never had before. Standing in the backyard, clutching Lily's filthy, torn sketchbook, I no longer felt like a timid daughter-in-law. I was a mother whose child was being violated. I cleaned the sketchbook as best I could and hid it in my closet, beneath a pile of old shawls. This was my first piece of evidence, but it wasn't enough. I couldn't show Edward a damaged sketchbook and expect him to understand. He'd blame Lily's carelessness, or the cat, or anything except his mother. I needed undeniable proof. I needed to witness it myself. I had a plan. It was reckless, risky, and it consumed the last $120 I had hidden away in a separate envelope for household expenses. But I had no choice. That morning, I dropped Lily off at school as usual. Mrs. Collins assumed I'd go straight home or stop by the grocery store. I didn't. I drove straight to the shopping mall in downtown Portland, Oregon, and headed directly to a large electronics store. I walked to the security equipment section. "I need a surveillance camera," I told the salesman. "The smallest one, something discreet." He looked at me, a housewife wearing a shawl, asking for a spy camera, but didn't question it. He showed me 2 miniature wireless cameras, each no bigger than a dice. Perfect. Both had night vision and motion detection. Both could connect directly to my phone. I paid in cash, refused to register the warranty under my name, and left immediately. My heart pounded the entire drive home. This was a gamble. If Mrs. Collins caught me installing them, I'd be finished. I'd be labeled a disrespectful daughter-in-law spying on her own mother-in-law. Everything would be turned against me. I arrived home just as Mrs. Collins was inside her bedroom, praying quietly.
I could hear her soft voice murmuring behind the door. This was my chance. I rushed into Lily's bedroom. I had to be fast. I tossed the first camera carelessly into my work bag. My focus was this room. Where was the best place to hide it? It needed a clear view of Lily's bed and the wall she had mentioned in her dream. My eyes landed on the bookshelf in the corner of the room. On the top shelf sat a large brown teddy bear, Lily's 3rd birthday gift. It was dusty. Lily rarely played with it anymore, but its position was perfect. Its eyes stared straight at the bed and the adjacent wall. With trembling hands, I took the bear down. I ran to my bedroom, grabbed a small pair of scissors and a sewing needle, then hurried back to Lily's room and quietly locked the door. I performed a rushed operation on the teddy bear. I snipped a few stitches around one of its plastic eyes, pushed the tiny camera lens into the hollow behind it, then sewed it back up clumsily. The stitching wasn't neat, but from a distance, no one would notice. I placed the bear back on the shelf, carefully adjusting its angle. Done. Now the second camera. This one was for the hallway. I needed to know exactly when she left her room. I slipped out of Lily's bedroom and scanned the hallway. A large framed piece of calligraphy-style artwork hung on the wall directly opposite Lily's room and Mrs. Collins's bedroom. I wedged the dice-sized camera into the narrow gap between the top of the frame and the wall. Its black casing disappeared perfectly into the shadows. I had just stepped down from the small stool I'd used when I heard a door open. "Sarah, are you home?" My heart leaped into my throat. "Yes, Mrs. Collins," I shouted, forcing my voice to sound normal. "I just got back. I was in Lily's room, tidying up her toys." I quickly slid the stool back into Lily's room. "Oh, I thought you went to the grocery store. Would you like me to make you some tea?" "No, thank you. I'm fine." I retreated into my bedroom and locked the door. My hands were still shaking. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out my phone, and began setting up both cameras. The screen split into two views. One showed the empty hallway, the other showed Lily's room from the teddy bear's perspective, slightly tilted but clear enough. The image quality wasn't great, but it was enough. Now all I had to do was wait. Waiting was the worst part. The rest of the day crawled by like a century. I picked Lily up from school, helped her with homework, cooked dinner. I sat at the same dining table as Mrs. Collins. We talked, we laughed, she complimented my cooking. I smiled and thanked her. But inside, I felt like a fraud. I was setting a trap. "You look pale, Sarah," Edward said that night as we got ready for bed. "Not sleeping well?" I forced a smile. "Just a bit under the weather. I took some medicine. You should sleep." I turned off the bedside lamp, but not my phone. I set it to silent, vibration only, and slid it under my pillow with the screen facing up. I pretended to close my eyes, but my entire body was wired tight. I listened to Edward's breathing slow, then turn into soft snoring. I listened to the wall clock strike 10, 11, 11:30. The house was utterly still. Doubt crept in. What if she didn't do it tonight? What if she knew I was suspicious? What if she had seen me? My eyelids grew heavy. I fought against overwhelming exhaustion. Maybe I should give up for tonight. Buzz. The faint vibration beneath my pillow jolted me awake. My heart nearly stopped as I pulled out my phone. The screen was glowing. 12 a.m. A single notification appeared. Words that made my blood run cold. Motion detected. Hallway. She was out. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone as I unlocked it. I tapped the notification. The live feed from the hallway camera filled the screen. The image was black and white, grainy from night mode, but the figure was unmistakable. Mrs. Margaret Collins. She stood outside her bedroom door looking left and right. The hallway was empty. She didn't turn on the lights, as if she knew every inch of the floor by heart. She tiptoed forward, barefoot, moving like a shadow toward Lily's room. She stopped at the door, listened for a moment, then gently pushed it open. Creak. She slipped inside. The door closed behind her. Bzz. Another alert. Motion detected. Lily's room. My breath caught in my throat. I swallowed hard and switched the feed to the teddy bear camera. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to break free from my ribs. The screen now showed my daughter's bedroom from above. Pale moonlight spilled through the window, mixed with the soft glow of Lily's rabbit-shaped nightlamp. I could see a small mound beneath the blanket. Lily was fast asleep. Then Mrs. Collins entered the frame. The first thing that sent a chill through me, she didn't look at Lily. She didn't go to the bed. She didn't check the blanket. Her excuse about Lily being cold was a complete lie. Instead, Mrs. Collins walked straight to the small art desk in the corner of the room, the desk where Lily had been coloring earlier that afternoon. In her hand was something small, a pen-sized flashlight. She turned it on. A sharp white beam illuminated the desk. She began searching. She flipped through Lily's new sketchbook, the one barely used. She yanked open the drawer, rummaging through crayons, markers, and loose papers, scattering them everywhere. She looked frantic, frustrated. She was searching for something she couldn't find. She was searching for the drawings I had rescued from the trash. After several minutes of fruitless searching, she let out a low growl, an angry, restrained sound. She turned off the flashlight and stood still in the darkness. For a moment, I thought she would give up and leave, but she didn't. She turned and walked slowly to the center of the room. She stopped in front of the plain wall beside Lily's bed, the same wall Lily had mentioned in her dream, the wall Grandfather Thomas had told her to color. Mrs. Collins turned the flashlight back on and shone it across the ivory surface. She pressed her ear against the wall. Then she began to knock. Tap, tap, tap. soft, rhythmic. She knocked at one spot, listened, then shifted slightly. Tap, tap, tap. She was sounding the wall, searching for hollow space behind it. I watched in horror. What was she looking for? A hidden compartment? Something Grandfather Thomas had concealed inside the wall of his granddaughter's bedroom? She muttered to herself, too softly for the camera to pick up clearly. Something like, "It should be here. Where did you hide it?" Her movements grew frantic. She pressed her palms against the wall, as if willing it to open. I was so focused on Mrs. Collins that I almost missed the movement on the bed. In the background of the footage, the blanket mound shifted. My breath stopped. Slowly, Lily sat up. Not like a child waking from a nightmare. She sat up stiff, as if pulled by invisible strings. Her eyes were open wide. Mrs. Collins, still obsessed with the wall, didn't notice her. I zoomed in on Lily's face. In the dim glow of the night camera, her eyes looked empty, white. She didn't see anything. She wasn't there. A frustrated Mrs. Margaret Collins gently struck the wall with the palm of her hand. "Damn it," she hissed. Then the sound came. The sound came from my phone's speaker, making me flinch so hard I nearly dropped it. "Don't touch my pictures." That wasn't Lily's voice. It was deep, hoarse, and filled with rage, the voice of an old man. Mrs. Margaret Collins froze. She stopped tapping. Her entire body went rigid. She turned off her flashlight, as if darkness itself could hide her. Then she slowly, very slowly, turned around. On the screen, I saw the most horrifying sight of my life. My 7-year-old daughter sat upright on her bed. Her eyes were empty, staring straight at her grandmother. "That is not for you." The voice again. The grandfather's voice. I recognized it. It was the voice of the late grandfather Thomas Collins. I had heard it before on old family videotapes. The same voice that once carried Edward in his arms. But now that voice was coming out of my little girl's mouth. Mrs. Margaret Collins let out a strangled sound. Not a scream. The sound of someone who had lost the ability to breathe from overwhelming terror. She began stepping backward. "Leave." Now Lily's voice returned, but it wasn't gentle. It thundered through the silent room. "Or you will regret it." That was the breaking point. Mrs. Margaret Collins screamed, not a quiet scream, but a piercing shriek of pure terror. She turned, tripped over Lily's toys, and fell hard onto the floor. She didn't care. She crawled, scrambled to her feet, and ran out of the room. She slammed Lily's bedroom door shut behind her. I quickly switched the feed to the hallway camera. I saw Mrs. Margaret Collins running frantically, crashing into the wall, then disappearing into her own bedroom and slamming the door shut. I switched back to Lily's room. Just as quickly as she had sat up, Lily lay back down. She pulled her blanket up to her chin, turned her back to the camera, and went back to sleep, as if nothing, absolutely nothing, had happened. I was still sitting on my bed. Edward shifted slightly beside me after hearing the door slam, but he only murmured and went back to sleep. I stared at my phone. I couldn't breathe. My heart, which had been pounding moments ago, now felt as if it had stopped entirely. All the blood in my body felt cold. I saved the recording. I played it again. The grandfather's voice coming from Lily's mouth. I played it again. Mrs. Margaret Collins' face twisted in sheer terror. That's when I finally understood. Everything made sense. Mrs. Margaret Collins wasn't afraid of Lily. She was afraid of her late husband. Somehow, Grandfather Thomas Collins was using Lily to protect something hidden behind that wall. Something Mrs. Margaret Collins wanted so badly that she was willing to steal her granddaughter's drawings and tear into the wall itself. This wasn't just about greed. This was a battle between my mother-in-law and the spirit of her own husband, and my daughter, Lily, was trapped right in the middle of it. I didn't sleep. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch in the dark living room, phone in my hand. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. I replayed the footage over and over. Lily sitting stiffly, her eyes empty, the hoarse voice of the grandfather speaking through her lips, Mrs. Margaret Collins screaming and fleeing in terror. Each time, the same icy sensation crawled up my spine. This was real. This was actually happening. My daughter, my flesh and blood, was being used as a shield, a vessel for an angry spirit, the spirit of my husband's father, furious at his own wife. Fear for Lily's safety hit me first. Was this hurting her? Was it dangerous? She looked peaceful afterward, fast asleep, but what happened to her soul when the grandfather took control? I rubbed my face as tears of fear and frustration welled up. As a mother, my first instinct was to protect. I wanted to run to Lily's room, scoop her up, and take her far, far away from this house in Willow Creek, Oregon. But then, anger took over. Anger at Mrs. Margaret Collins. She knew. She had known all along. The fear I had seen on her face that first night in the hallway wasn't fear of the dark. She had heard that voice before. She wasn't checking Lily's blanket. She was provoking it, knocking on that wall, trying to find what the grandfather had hidden, night after night, using her own granddaughter as bait. She sacrificed Lily's peace for her own greed. And Edward? Edward didn't know anything. He defended his mother. He called me paranoid. I couldn't fully blame him. How could I possibly explain this? Your mother is being haunted by your dead father who was possessing our daughter. He would think I was insane. I needed more. The recording was the core of the truth, but I needed the motive. I needed the map Mrs. Margaret Collins was searching for. I waited for sunrise like it was salvation. Morning arrived with an eerily normal atmosphere. Lily woke up cheerful, just like always. She jumped onto our bed, and Edward wrapped his arms around both of us. "Mom, Dad, wake up! Lily's hungry." I hugged her so tightly she protested. I breathed in the scent of her hair, baby shampoo. She was real. She was warm. She was my child, and I would do anything to protect her. At breakfast, the mood was completely different. Edward, unaware of everything, complained about being tired. Someone slammed a door really hard last night. Yes, really loud. Mrs. Margaret Collins, stirring her tea, nearly dropped her cup. Her hands were shaking. She looked terrible, pale with deep dark circles under her eyes. She didn't dare look at me. She didn't dare look at Lily. "Oh, yes, Edward," she stammered. "I had a bad dream, kept waking up. I must have hit the bathroom door accidentally. Sorry for scaring you." Another lie. Lily, in her innocence, looked up at her grandmother. "Grandma, are you sick? You look pale." Mrs. Margaret Collins flinched as if Lily's gaze had electrocuted her. "No, sweetheart. Grandma just didn't sleep well." She stood up abruptly. "I'm going to lay down. I'm dizzy." She locked herself in her room and didn't come out again that morning. Edward left for work, confused. "Mom's acting strange today," he said. I just nodded. Maybe she's not feeling well. This was my chance. After dropping Lily off at school, I went straight back home. Mrs. Margaret Collins was still locked in her room. I ran to my closet. I pulled out Lily's torn, dirty sketchbook, the one I had rescued from the trash. I took it to the dining table where the light was brightest, page by page. Most were normal drawings for a 7-year-old. Rainbows, twin mountains, fields, our family with funny proportions. Then I found it, the torn pages that matched the missing ones. It was a sequence of drawings. The first was a map, a crude floor plan drawn in crayon, but I recognized it immediately. The upper floor of our house. 4 boxes. My bedroom with Edward, the grandmother's room, the bathroom, and Lily's room. Inside Lily's room, one wall was heavily shaded in black crayon, the same wall Mrs. Margaret Collins had been knocking on, and in the center of that wall, a large red X. My heart pounded. This was it. This was the map. Lily drew exactly what the grandfather showed her in her dreams. I flipped to the next page. It confused me more. The entire page was filled with repeated numbers, scribbled over and over. 220588, 220588, 220588. It was unmistakably Lily's handwriting, but what did it mean? A code? A phone number? I stared at the numbers, searching for a pattern. 22/05/88. A date. May 22nd, 1988. I thought hard. What happened on that date? Not Edward's birthday. No. Edward was born in August. Then a memory surfaced in my mind. An old photograph from the family album. A photo of a much younger Edward holding a tiny newborn baby. I ran to the living room and opened the cabinet where the photo albums were kept. I pulled out the thickest album. There it was. Edward, me, and Lily, just born, still in the hospital. My eyes went to a small slip of paper taped beside the photo. Lily's hospital wristband. Lily Aninditha Collins, born May 22nd, 2017. I was wrong. That wasn't an 8. Wait. I looked again at Lily's scribbles. 22/05/88. I flipped back to the album and searched further. Edward and Sarah's wedding album, Edward's graduation album, then his childhood album. And there, a photo of the grandfather. He was smiling broadly, looking much younger and happier than I had ever known him. He was holding a trophy. Below it, written in Mrs. Margaret Collins' handwriting, Dad won his first major contract, May 22nd, 1988. No, that wasn't it. Something still felt wrong. I looked again at Lily's drawing. Then it hit me. Maybe I was reading it wrong. Maybe it wasn't a year. Maybe it was 3 separate numbers. 22/05/88. A safe combination. The grandfather hid a safe behind that wall, and the code was 22/05/88. All the rumors about the late grandfather suddenly came flooding back. He had been incredibly successful, but toward the end of his life he became deeply paranoid. He trusted no one, especially not his own wife. There had always been whispers that Mrs. Margaret Collins had a secret gambling habit, and that the grandfather knew about it. He never officially changed his will, but everyone suspected he had secured most of his wealth somewhere his wife could never reach. He hid it behind the wall of his granddaughter's room, a granddaughter who hadn't even been born when he hid it. But wait, Lily's birth date was 22/05. Was that a coincidence? The grandfather died before Lily was born. How could he have known? Or did he know? Did he set the code as 22/05 and the third number was something else, and Lily in her dreams wrote it incorrectly? No. I looked again. 22/05/88. Then I remembered something. When we first moved into this house, Edward once pointed at that wall. "This room used to be my dad's office," he said. "He tore it down and renovated it before he died, said he wanted to turn it into a playroom for his future grandchild. He renovated it. He built the safe, and he set the code. But what did 88 mean?" My mind hit a wall. But one thing was certain. Mrs. Margaret Collins knew there was a safe. She knew the location thanks to Lily's drawings. But she didn't know the code. That was what she was searching for in Lily's room. That was what she was trying to force Lily to reveal while the grandfather's spirit possessed her. And now she had failed. I went back to my phone. I replayed the hallway camera footage from last night, the recording after Mrs. Margaret Collins ran back to her room. I hadn't paid attention to it before. I'd been too focused on Lily. Now I watched carefully. 12:15 a.m. Mrs. Margaret Collins' bedroom door opened slightly. She peeked out, making sure the hallway was empty. Then she stepped out. Her phone was pressed to her ear. I zoomed in. Her face was no longer terrified. It was furious, angry, and full of determination. She paced back and forth in the hallway, whispering rapidly into the phone. I couldn't hear her voice, but I could see her gestures. She pointed toward Lily's room. She nodded quickly. Mrs. Margaret Collins was calling someone. A new kind of cold fear, far worse than before, washed over me. Her fear of her husband's spirit was gone, replaced by reckless greed. She couldn't get the code. The grandfather's spirit was too strong, so she would use force. She was going to tear down the wall, and she wouldn't do it alone. She had called for help. I looked at the clock on the wall. 11 a.m. I didn't know when they would come. Tonight? Or right now? I had to tell Edward. I couldn't face this alone anymore. I couldn't wait for him to come home after work. This wasn't something that could be explained over the phone. I called his office. I forced my voice to shake, panicked and breaking. "Edward, you have to come home now." "Sarah? What wrong? Are you okay? Lily?" "No, Lily's safe. She's at school." A pause. Then, "What?" "It's your mother. Please come home. I'm scared." I wasn't lying. I was terrified. 30 minutes later, I heard Edward's car screech into the garage. He ran into the house, pale with worry. "Sarah, where's Mom? What happened? Did she fall?" Mrs. Margaret Collins must have heard the commotion because she opened her bedroom door. She looked shocked to see Edward home. "Edward? Why are you home?" Edward looked at her, then at me. "Sarah, you said you're—" I cut him off. I grabbed Edward's hand. "We need to talk. In our bedroom, now." I looked straight into Mrs. Margaret Collins' eyes. My gaze was cold. "This is a matter between husband and wife, Mrs. Collins. Excuse us." She looked confused and suspicious, but she couldn't stop us. I pulled Edward into our bedroom and locked the door. "Sarah, explain what is going on," Edward demanded, his frustration rising with his confusion. "You scared me half to death. Mom looks fine." "Sit down, Edward." My voice was flat. "Sit. And please, for our daughter's sake, listen until I'm finished. No interrupting. No defending anyone." He saw the seriousness on my face. Finally, he complied. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at me anxiously. I didn't waste time. "You remember when I said I was suspicious of your mother?" He nodded. "You remember when I said she went into Lily's room every night?" Another nod, impatient now. I was right, and the reason is worse than you can imagine. I picked up my phone. "I'm not going to explain. I'm going to show you. This is footage from a hidden CCTV camera I installed in Lily's room yesterday." Edward's face hardened. "You installed cameras in this house to spy on my mother?" "Don't interrupt. Just watch." I played the first clip. The hallway footage. Mrs. Margaret Collins sneaking in. Edward snorted. She was just checking on her. I cut him off and played the second clip, the footage from inside the teddy bear. Edward watched in silence. His eyes widened as he saw his mother ignore Lily, search the desk, and tap on the wall. "What is Mom doing?" he whispered. "Wait." My heart started pounding again. I braced myself. On the screen, Lily sat up. "Lily?" Edward leaned forward. Then the voice came from the phone. "Don't touch my pictures." Edward jumped the bed like he'd been electrocuted. What the hell was that? That is not for you. My phone trembled in my hands. Edward stared at the screen, then at me. His face was completely drained of color. He looked like he was staring at a ghost. Leave. Then Mrs. Margaret Collins' scream. The footage continued, her running in blind terror. I stopped the recording. Silence filled the room. Edward stood frozen in the middle of the bedroom. He was shaking. Sarah, that was my father's voice. No, that's impossible. He shook his head violently. His eyes were wide with horror. This is edited. You edited this. You hate my mother. Pain stabbed through my chest. You think I could do this? You think I could make your father's voice come out of Lily's mouth? I don't know, he stammered, but this is insane. This is reality, I said quietly. I stood there, staring at him sharply. This is what happens in our house every single night while you're asleep, I said. Your mother, your own mother, has been disturbing our daughter, trying to steal something your father hid behind that wall, and your father's spirit is using Lily to stop her. I threw Lily's torn sketchbook onto the bed. This is what she's been looking for. Edward picked it up with trembling hands. He stared at the floor plan, the bold X marked on the wall. And this, I said, pointing to the page filled with numbers. 220588. I don't know what it is. Maybe a safe code. But your mother wants it. She wants it so badly that she's being terrorized by her own husband's spirit. Edward collapsed onto the floor. He clutched his head. Oh my God, Lily's father, he whispered. The horror in his eyes was pure now. He was no longer a son defending his mother. He was a terrified father. What do we do? He whispered, his voice breaking. I don't know what your father hid, I said, but your mother won't stop. I told him about the phone call I saw in the hallway footage. She called someone, Edward. She's not scared anymore. She's angry. She's going to tear that wall down by force. She's bringing outsiders into this house. Edward's eyes flashed with rage. She wouldn't dare. This is my house. She will, I said firmly. She'll do it while we're asleep, or when we're not here. We can't let that happen. Edward stood up. His face hardened. Tonight, he said. Tonight we confront her. We don't sleep. We wait in Lily's room. You, me, and Lily. We lock the door. If she tries to come in, What if she brings people? I asked. We don't know who she called. Thugs. Edward fell silent. He knew I was right. This could turn dangerous. The tension in the house became thick, suffocating. We picked Lily up from school. I made her stay in our bedroom, never letting her out of my sight. Dinner was torture. Mrs. Margaret Collins finally came out of her room. Her face was fully made up. She tried to act normal, but the tremor in her hands as she held her spoon was unmistakable. Lily, go to bed early tonight, okay? She said softly. Her voice wavered. Lily nodded. Okay, Grandma. Edward stared at his mother with a look I had never seen before, a mix of disgust, pity, and barely restrained rage. You look better, Mom, he said coldly. Mrs. Margaret Collins flinched. Yes, just a bit of a headache earlier. She couldn't meet his eyes. After dinner, I brought Lily into our bedroom. Tonight, Lily sleeps with Mom and Dad. In Mommy's room? Lily grinned. Yay, that's fun. We locked the bedroom door. Edward and I didn't speak. We sat on the bed with Lily sleeping peacefully between us. My phone was in my hand. The hallway CCTV feed glowed on the screen. We waited. 10 o'clock. Silent. 11 o'clock. Silent. 11:30. Edward was nearly asleep, sitting upright. Then, exactly at midnight, bzzz, my phone vibrated. Edward and I locked eyes, then looked at the screen. Mrs. Margaret Collins' bedroom door opened. She stepped out and glanced toward our closed door. She was sure we were asleep. Then she walked, not toward Lily's room, but toward the front door. She opened it. 2 men entered. Both were large, wearing black jackets and caps. Their faces were hard to see. One of them carried a large, bulging backpack. They were clearly not ordinary visitors. On the screen, I saw Mrs. Margaret Collins pointing down the hallway toward Lily's room. She whispered urgently, "Quick, be quiet. Tear down the wall next to the bed. Whatever happens, ignore the child." Edward clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. "Edward," I whispered. My hands shook violently as I pressed the call button on my phone. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Calling the police," I whispered back. "Now." As the call connected, bzzz, motion detected. Lily's room. "They're inside," Edward whispered. "My God, they're really doing it." He stood up. "Sarah, stay with Lily. Lock this door. Don't come out no matter what." "Edward, where are you going?" "To my mother." My heart felt like it stopped. 2 grown men were inside my daughter's bedroom. Edward stood rigid beside me, fists clenched, eyes fixed on the door. My phone was still live. CCTV footage from Lily's room still streaming, the police call still connected. I slipped the phone into the pocket of my house dress. In the hallway, Mrs. Margaret Collins stood rigid in front of Lily's door, slightly ajar. She was acting as lookout. She didn't realize Edward was behind her until he spoke. "Mom?" His voice was low, heavy, and filled with restrained fury. Mrs. Margaret Collins jumped. She turned around, her face drained of color when she saw Edward standing there, eyes blazing. "Edward? You're not asleep," she stammered. "What are you doing?" Edward asked again. His voice rose. "I just called some workers," she said weakly. There's a leak." "Workers?" Edward laughed, a dry, terrifying laugh. "Workers? At midnight? Carrying crowbars? Coming through the front door you opened?" She stepped back, terrified. She had never seen his son like this. Then we heard it. Crack. A loud sound came from inside Lily's room, metal striking plaster. Edward's face shifted instantly from rage to panic. "Lily!" He shoved his mother aside. "Move!" He ran toward Lily's door, but before he could open it, we heard another sound. Not the crowbar. A voice. Not my daughter's voice. "Don't touch it." The roar was deafening, filled with rage so intense the hallway wall seemed to vibrate. It was the grandfather's voice, louder than anything captured on my phone. This was pure fury. Edward froze in front of the door. From across the hallway, I heard the men inside. "What the hell was that?" one of them shouted. "It's just a kid," the other scoffed. "She's sleep-talking." "Forget it," the first man snapped. "Hurry up, break the wall, we get paid and we're out." Then, crack. Another violent blow to the wall. They ignored the warning. What happened next would haunt me for the rest of my life. The second roar that burst from Lily's room was not made of words. It was an inhuman scream of rage, long, shrill, and piercing. Then, crash. A deafening impact followed, the sound of splintering wood, heavy objects crashing down, dust exploding into the air. The entire floor of the house shook violently. Even the car alarm across the street went off from the sheer force of the vibration. In our bedroom, Lily jolted awake. "Mom, what's happening? Is it an earthquake?" She began to cry. I ran in and wrapped her in my arms. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. Stay here." Then I heard it. A scream. A grown man's scream, raw with terror. Demon! This house is haunted! My leg! Help, my leg! Lily's bedroom door was suddenly kicked open from the inside. The two hired thugs came sprinting out. One was limping badly. The other's face was caked with dust, his eyes wild with fear. They looked like men who had just seen the devil himself. "This is insane! Deals off, ma'am!" The uninjured one shouted as he shoved Mrs. Margaret Collins, who stood frozen in the hallway. They bolted down the stairs in blind panic. I heard the front door slam open, then footsteps disappearing into the street. The hallway fell silent again. A suffocating silence, broken only by Lily's sobbing from our room and the distant wail of a car alarm outside. Dust floated thickly in the air from Lily's shattered doorway. Edward stood rigid at the threshold, staring into the destroyed room. I stepped out and slowly approached him. "Ed." I peeked over his shoulder. The sight was horrifying. A massive, solid teak bookcase, nearly touching the ceiling, the same one I had seen earlier on the security footage, had collapsed completely. It had fallen exactly where the two men had been standing moments before. Books, toys, and chunks of broken wood were scattered everywhere. Their crowbar lay among the debris, torn from their grip. If the cabinet had fallen even a second earlier, both men would have been crushed to death. And in the center of all that chaos, on her dust-covered bed, Lily sat upright. Her eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, empty, hollow. Mrs. Margaret Collins, who had been frozen in shock, finally seemed to awaken. Her plan had failed. The hired men had fled. Her secret was exposed. I saw something change in her face. The fear vanished. The shock vanished. All that remained was pure, desperate greed. She looked like a cornered wolf. Her gaze snapped at Edward, then to me, then to Lily, sitting like a lifeless doll. "This is all because of you," she hissed. Not at us, but at Lily. Before Edward or I could react, Mrs. Collins lunged into Lily's room. She stepped over the wreckage without hesitation. She ignored the fallen cabinet. She ignored Edward shouting her name. She rushed to the bed and grabbed Lily by the shoulders. "Where is the code?" she screamed, her voice shrill with hysteria. She shook Lily violently. "What numbers are they? Tell Grandma! Tell me now, you cursed child!" Seeing my daughter being shaken like a rag doll by her own grandmother shattered the last restraint Edward had. "Enough!" Edward's roar was louder than the cabinet crashing down. It was the roar of a father whose child was being harmed. He lunged forward, not pushing her, but ripping her hands away from Lily's shoulders with brutal force. His grip was so strong, Mrs. Collins screamed in pain. He flung her hands aside and shoved her away from the bed. He stood between his mother and his daughter, chest heaving. "Don't you ever touch my child again." I rushed to Lily's side. The violent shaking seemed to have fully awakened her. Grandfather Thomas's spirit was gone. What remained was my confused, terrified little girl. "Mom, why is Grandma angry at Lily?" She sobbed uncontrollably, her body trembling. "Shh, it's okay, sweetheart. It's okay." I held her tightly, pouring every ounce of strength I had into her. I kissed the top of her dust-covered head. "I'm here. Daddy's here. You're safe." Across the room, the confrontation reached its breaking point. Mrs. Margaret Collins stumbled backward until her spine hit the damaged wall, the same spot the crowbar had struck earlier. She stared at her son, eyes wide, her face twisted with confusion and fury. "You're choosing them?" she shrieked, pointing at Lily and me. "You're choosing that child over your own mother?" "That child has a name," Edward snapped, his voice shaking. "She is Lily. She is my daughter, and you just tried to hurt her." "I didn't!" Mrs. Collins screamed. I just wanted what's rightfully yours, Edward, what's rightfully ours. Your father hid it from us. That money belongs to you. What right? Edward shouted, his voice echoed through the ruined room. The right to terrorize this house, the right to bring thugs into your granddaughter's bedroom, the right to rob us? He spat the word, rob. It's not robbery, it's inheritance, she cried, tears streaming now, tears of rage, not regret. I stood by him when he had nothing. I supported him from the very beginning. And in the end, he trusted a dead man's spirit and a child over me, his own wife. Because he knew you, Edward said quietly, pointing at her. He knew exactly what you are. He knew you couldn't be trusted. He knew you'd burn through everything. You know nothing. I know enough. They kept screaming at each other, hurling blame back and forth. I hugged Lily tighter, trying to shield her ears from the chaos. Enough, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through them both. They turned to look at me. I was still sitting on the bed, holding Lily. In my free hand, my phone was glowing. Edward, I said calmly, you don't need to argue. Then I looked straight at Mrs. Margaret Collins, her face twisted with hatred. You want the truth? I asked coldly. Do you want Edward to hear what really happened when no one else was watching? Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I raised my phone. I exited the security camera feed and opened my video gallery. I tapped a saved video from the previous night, the recording from Chapter 4. I pressed play and turned the volume all the way up. In the shattered room, every sound was crystal clear. The soft footsteps of Mrs. Collins sneaking around, the sound of her rummaging through Lily's desk, her fingers tapping on the wall. Tap, tap. Edward's face hardened as he stared at the screen, then at his mother. Then the raspy, terrifying voice of Grandfather Thomas filled the room. Don't touch my pictures. Mrs. Collins recoiled as if slapped. That's not for you. The recording continued, capturing the threats, and finally, her own piercing scream of pure terror as she fled. I stopped the video. Silence. Edward stared at his mother. The anger was gone. His face was empty, shattered. He had just heard undeniable proof that his mother had lied. She wasn't just greedy. She was a coward, someone who fled in terror, then returned with hired thugs to do her dirty work. Hearing her own recording played in front of her son finally shattered Mrs. Margaret Collins's defenses. She didn't scream anymore. She didn't argue. Her shoulders slumped. Slowly, she slid down the wall and collapsed onto the floor among the scattered books. He always hated me, she whispered, tears now streaming freely. These were no longer tears of rage. They were tears of defeat. Ever since he married me, he said I was trouble. He hid everything. He said I would destroy the family. The confessions poured out. About her gambling debts from years ago, about how Grandfather Thomas Collins had paid them off, and how, from that day on, he never trusted her again. About how she knew he had hidden an emergency family fund somewhere in this house. I knew it. I knew he hid it here. When Lily started talking in her sleep, mentioning him, then she began drawing that layout. I knew it had to be from him. She tried to take the drawings. She tried to find the code. But every time I got close to her, he came. He possessed the child. He drove me away. She looked at us with desperate eyes. I had no other choice. I had to tear this place apart. That money is Edward's right. No, Edward said quietly, shaking his head. That's not my right, Mom. If Dad hid it from you, that means he hid it from me too, because he knew you would eventually force me to give it to you. The truth of Edward's words hung heavy in the air. That was when Lily, who had stopped crying in my arms, moved. She pointed toward the damaged wall. Mom, the wall is broken. I followed her finger. Inside the gaping hole where the crowbar had struck, I saw it. Something dark, metallic, the corner of a steel box, a safe. Mrs. Collins's eyes flew wide open. Greed flared instantly. "That's it," she gasped, starting to rise. But before she could stand, Lily spoke again. Her voice was clear, her own voice, not her grandfather's. She looked directly at her grandmother with eyes far too old for a child. "Grandpa said Grandma is greedy," Lily said softly. "That's why Grandpa told Lily the code, so Lily could protect it. Grandpa said Lily is the only one he can trust." That simple statement, pure truth from a child's mouth, was the final blow. More painful than Edward's anger, more devastating than the video recording. Mrs. Collins stared. She wasn't just greedy. She was a coward, someone who fled in terror then returned with hired thugs to do her dirty work. Hearing her own recording played in front of her son finally shattered Mrs. Margaret Collins's defenses. She didn't scream anymore. She didn't argue. Her shoulders slumped. Slowly, she slid down the wall and collapsed onto the floor among the scattered books. "He always hated me," she whispered, tears now streaming freely. These were no longer tears of rage. They were tears of defeat. "Ever since he married me, he said I was trouble. He hid everything. He said I would destroy the family." The confessions poured out. About her gambling debts from years ago, about how grandfather Thomas Collins had paid them off, and how, from that day on, he never trusted her again. About how she knew he had hidden an emergency family fund somewhere in this house. "I knew it. I knew he hid it here." When Lily started talking in her sleep, mentioning him, then she began drawing that layout. I knew it had to be from him." She tried to take the drawings. She tried to find the code. "But every time I got close to her, he came. He possessed the child. He drove me away." She looked at us with desperate eyes. "I had no other choice. I had to tear this place apart. That money is Edward's right." "No," Edward said quietly, shaking his head. "That's not my right, Mom. If Dad hid it from you, that means he hid it from me too, because he knew you would eventually force me to give it to you." The truth of Edward's words hung heavy in the air. That was when Lily, who had stopped crying in my arms, moved. She pointed toward the damaged wall. "Mom, the wall is broken." I followed her finger. Inside the gaping hole where the crowbar had struck, I saw it. Something dark, metallic, the corner of a steel box, a safe. Mrs. Collins's eyes flew wide open. Greed flared instantly. "That's it," she gasped, starting to rise. But before she could stand, Lily spoke again. Her voice was clear, her own voice, not her grandfather's. She looked directly at her grandmother with eyes far too old for a child. "Grandpa said Grandma is greedy," Lily said softly. "That's why Grandpa told Lily the code, so Lily could protect it. Grandpa said Lily is the only one he can trust." That simple statement, pure truth from a child's mouth, was the final blow. More painful than Edward's anger, more devastating than the video recording. Mrs. Collins stared at her granddaughter, and for the first time, I saw overwhelming shame on her face. She was defeated, not by a spirit, but by the honesty of a child. The silence in the ruined room was thick and heavy. Lily's words, "Grandpa said Grandma is greedy," hung in the air, sharper than the broken glass on the floor. Mrs. Collins sat limp among the debris, her face pale. Being exposed by her own grandchild crushed the last remnants of her pride and greed. She didn't scream anymore. She simply bowed her head, staring at the dirty floor. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Edward and I exchanged a glance. On my husband's face, I saw no victory, only deep sorrow. He had just watched his mother fall apart, but he had also seen his daughter sitting calmly on the bed, as if a massive burden had just been lifted. Edward took a deep breath and shifted his gaze from his mother to the damaged wall, to the steel box emerging from the shattered plaster. "Ed," I whispered. He nodded, as if waking from a nightmare. Carefully, he walked forward, stepping over the abandoned crowbar, and stood before the wall. He studied the old safe. It was black, dull, and solid. In the center was a classic rotary handle and a traditional number combination. With careful hands, almost as if afraid to waken another spirit, Edward brushed away the remaining plaster. White dust fell. The safe was large, embedded deep into the concrete wall. He tugged on the handle, locked tight. "The code," Mrs. Collins whispered from the floor, her voice hoarse and desperate. "The code." Edward turned to her. "Because Dad didn't want you to open it." He turned back to us, his eyes moving from me to Lily. Lily, still in my arms, met his gaze calmly. She wasn't afraid anymore. "Lily," Edward said gently, "sweetheart, do you know the numbers?" Lily nodded slowly. "Grandpa told Lily in a dream. He said, 'You must remember these numbers very well. This is our secret. Don't tell Grandma.'" Mrs. Collins gasped. Her sobbing grew louder. "What numbers, sweetheart?" I asked, stroking Lily's hair. Lily closed her eyes briefly, as if recalling a lesson. Then she opened them and spoke clearly. 22, 05, 88. I breath caught. 22, 05, 88. The numbers I had seen in her drawings, the numbers I had been trying to understand all day. "It's Lily's birthday," I blurted. "May 22nd. Edward stared at me, then at Lily, then back at the safe. His expression a mix of awe and horror. His father had died before Lily was born, yet somehow knew her granddaughter's birth date. His spirit had chosen it as the code, a supernatural bond that transcended death. Edward turned back to the safe. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the dial. 22, he whispered, turning right. He stopped, then turned left. 05. He paused again, then turned right. 88. At 88, a small but unmistakable click echoed from inside the safe. Silence. Edward swallowed hard and looked at me. I nodded, giving him strength. He grasped the handle and pulled. The heavy steel door opened with a soft creak. We all held our breath. Even Mrs. Collins's sobbing stopped. Edward used his phone's light to illuminate the dark interior. The light reflected instantly, blinding us. Inside was gold, not one or two pieces, but neatly stacked small gold bars. Beside them were several organized bundles of documents, land deeds, bank certificates, immense wealth. Mrs. Collins's eyes locked onto the gleaming gold. Greed resurfaced, swallowing her shame. She began to move, trying to stand. "But that's not all," Edward said. On top of the gold lay 2 envelopes, clean, white. The first was thick and large, written in Grandfather Thomas Collins' elegant handwriting, "For my granddaughter, Lily Collins, to be opened by her parents, Edward and Sarah." Edward took the envelope, his hands still shaking, and opened it carefully. Inside were several neatly typed, officially stamped documents. "This is," Edward whispered, "this is a will, an additional will." He began to read aloud. His voice echoed through the shattered room. The letter stated that all assets inside the safe, every gram of gold, every single certificate, were legally designated as a trust fund, entirely inherited by Lily Collins. The wealth could not be liquidated until Lily reached the age of 21 and could only be used for her education. The letter also appointed the trustees of the fund. "As the legal trustees of this trust," Edward read, his voice catching slightly, "I appoint my son Edward Collins and my daughter-in-law Sarah Collins to manage it jointly." I gasped. Grandfather Thomas had mentioned my name. He trusted me, just as much as he trusted his own son. He knew Edward would struggle to stand up to his mother, so he made me the second gatekeeper. Edward stopped reading the legal document. Behind it was a single sheet of personal stationery, Grandfather Thomas's handwriting again, addressed to Lily. If you are reading this, or if your parents are reading it to you, it means I am gone. But I have never truly left you. Even before you were born, I knew you would be the guardian of my secret. I hid this not from your father, but from your grandmother. Her greed blinded her. I could not allow her to destroy your future or your father's. I knew she would try to take it. That is why I chose you. My spirit will protect you. I chose the safe's code after my death and whispered it to you in your dreams. It is your date of birth, 220588. I jolted. Lily's birthday was May 22, but the year? I looked at Lily again. Then it hit me. Grandfather Thomas had died in 1987. He couldn't possibly know the year. But then I remembered Lily's drawing, 220517. That wasn't 88. That crooked number, it was a child's messy handwriting. It was 17. Edward, I whispered urgently, the number is 220517. That's Lily's birthday, not 88. Edward frowned, but I turned the dial to 88. I'm sure, I said softly. I turned to Lily. Sweetheart, did Grandpa say 88 or 17? Lily shook her head. Grandpa said 22,588. Confusion washed over me. Then Edward, still holding the letter, let out a quiet, broken laugh. I understand, he whispered. He pointed to the bottom of the page. P.S. The code is your birthday, 2205, and the final number, 88, is our old house number, the home where your father grew up, the place where we were once happy. I know your grandmother will never remember it. The truth hit us hard. Grandfather Thomas had been brilliant. He combined the future, Lily's birthday, which he somehow knew supernaturally, with the past, a memory only he and his son shared, long forgotten by his wife. He knew, Edward whispered. He knew Mom would try. He knew Lily would be targeted. He planned everything. Edward set the letter down and looked back into the safe. In the corner lay the second envelope, smaller, thinner. He picked it up. It bore only one name, Margaret. Edward held the envelope, staring at his mother, who was still sitting on the floor. Mrs. Margaret Collins looked back at him. Her face was filled with fear, not of spirits, but of her father's final words. Edward walked slowly toward her. He said nothing. He crouched down and extended the envelope. Mrs. Collins' hands trembled violently as she took it. The envelope felt heavy in her grasp, as if it were made of lead instead of paper. I hugged Lily tightly and turned her face into my shoulder. I didn't want her to see this, but I did. I watched Mrs. Collins tear the envelope open with shaking fingers. Inside was a single folded sheet, one sentence, written in Grandfather Thomas's bold black ink. We couldn't read it from where we stood, but we saw her reaction. Mrs. Collins' face hardened. The tears dried instantly, replaced by a flash of raw fury. Her shame vanished, washed away by her husband's final insult. She crushed the paper in her fist. No! The scream was deafening. It was the scream of someone who had lost everything and no longer cared. After all of this? That's it? That's all he left me? She sprang to her feet with terrifying speed, like a striking snake. She no longer cared about Edward. She no longer cared about us. Her eyes locked on the open safe, on the glittering gold. It's mine. All of it is mine. She lunged forward, fingers clawing toward the gold bars. But Edward was ready. He knew his mother. Enough, Mom, enough. He grabbed both of her wrists. A tragic struggle erupted, a son trying to restrain his own mother who had descended into madness from stealing her granddaughter's inheritance. Let go, Edward, she screamed. It's my right, my right. She thrashed wildly, even trying to bite his hand. Edward, I screamed in terror, clutching Lily, who had begun crying again. And at the peak of the chaos, flashing blue and red lights suddenly flooded the ruined room through the window. Edward grappling with his mother in front of the open safe. Then we heard it, a sound that should have been terrifying, but that night sounded like the most beautiful music in the world. Sirens. Police sirens. They grew louder, then stopped right in front of our house. "I called the police," I whispered in relief. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. The front door must have been open after the thugs fled. "Police, don't move!" Two uniformed officers entered the room, flashlights sweeping sharply. They took in the scene immediately. Debris, the open safe, the gold, Edward restraining his mother. "Release the woman," one officer ordered. Edward immediately let go and raised his hands. She's my mother, sir. She was trying to take." The moment he released her, Mrs. Collins lunged again. "Mine!" The second officer reacted instantly, grabbing her and restraining her firmly. "Calm down, ma'am. Calm down." "She's crazy," Mrs. Collins screamed, pointing at Edward. "He's robbing me." "That's a lie," I said, stepping forward while still holding Lily. "She robbed us. She brought hired men inside this house to break down that wall. I have the footage." I raised my phone. "I recorded everything. She brought hired men inside. She threatened my child." The first officer looked at me, then at Edward, then at Mrs. Collins, struggling violently. "Sir, ma'am, please step outside with us. Let's calm everyone down." As they led Mrs. Collins out, another officer shouted from downstairs. "Sir, we got two suspects hiding in a neighbor's yard. One's limping. Looks like an organized crew." The thugs had been caught. Mrs. Collins stopped struggling. She knew it was over. She was escorted down the stairs. As she passed Edward, she didn't look at him. Her face was empty, destroyed. Edward watched his mother disappear. Tears pooled in his eyes. It was a victory, but a bitter one. Months passed. Our house was repaired. Lily's bedroom wall was whole again, painted a cheerful pink. A new bookshelf, smaller and safer, stood in its place. The safe had been transferred to the bank. Its contents now rested securely in a safety deposit box under Lily Collins' name, managed under Edward's and my guardianship. Mrs. Margaret Collins was found guilty. My CCTV footage, combined with full confessions from the terrified thugs, became undeniable evidence. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit robbery and endangering a minor. She was sent to a women's correctional facility. Edward visited her once a month, not because he had forgiven her, but as he told me quietly, "She's still my mother, even if she's broken." The crumpled paper Mrs. Collins had crushed that night, Edward picked it up after the police left. Its contents were exactly as expected. Grandfather's final insult. "Your inheritance is shame." Life slowly returned to normal, but it was a new normal. Edward and I grew closer. We had survived the worst storm together and lived. He now saw me not just as his wife, but as his partner, his protector, and Lily's. Lily never spoke in her sleep again. She never dreamed of her grandfather again. It was as if once the inheritance was secured, Grandfather Thomas's spirit finally found peace. That afternoon, I sat on the back porch watching them. I wore a casual shawl, a warm cup of tea in my hand. Edward sat beside me, reading the newspaper. Lily was drawing in her new sketchbook. She ran toward me, holding up her drawing. It wasn't a floor plan. It wasn't mysterious numbers. It was a picture of 3 people, a man, a woman wearing a shawl, and a little girl between them. They were holding hands beneath a smiling sun. "This is Mom. This is Dad. This is Lily," she said proudly. I smiled and hugged her tightly. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." I looked at Edward. He smiled back at me. At last, the house felt calm, peaceful. The real treasure wasn't the gold in the safe, but the peace we finally found.